I always thought cancer would be the hardest fight of my life. I was wrong. Because while the chemotherapy tried to break down my body, it was my husband who tried to break my soul. My name is Marisa Green, and this is the story of how I uncovered the most gut-wrenching betrayal and how I turned it into a weapon sharp enough to destroy the man who thought I wouldn't survive. It started on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. I was halfway through my second cycle of chemo. My body ached, my head throbbed, and all I wanted was to rest. Daniel, my husband, had been the one managing our bills, our savings, everything. He told me, "You shouldn't stress, Marisa. Just focus on getting better. I'll take care of everything else." And I believed him. Because that's what marriage is, right? Trust. But that afternoon, as I sat in my recliner, I had this pull. A gut instinct I couldn't shake. Something told me to check our joint savings account. I hadn't looked at it in months. Every hospital bill, every insurance form, Daniel handled. My hands trembled as I typed in the password, the screen loaded, and then my heart stopped. There were 3 massive wire transfers. Thousands of dollars. Gone. The recipient? A name I didn't recognize at first. Sophia Reynolds. At first I thought maybe she's a nurse, a specialist, maybe Daniel hired someone to help me at home, but then it clicked. Sophia Reynolds. The so-called nutritionist Daniel had insisted I try. The one whose advice he quoted constantly. Sophia says kale is good for immunity. Sophia recommends these supplements. She had been in my orbit for months. And now, there was her name draining my savings account. My blood ran cold. That was the exact second I realized I wasn't just fighting cancer. I was fighting betrayal. When Daniel and I first got the diagnosis, he was perfect. He held my hand through the biopsies, sat with me while doctors explained chemo side effects, brought me soup when I couldn't keep food down. He even joked with the nurses. I thought, thank God I married a man strong enough to carry us through this. But somewhere between my first treatment and the second, he began to change. At first it was subtle. He missed one hospital appointment, claiming work ran late, then another, because traffic was terrible. Eventually he stopped coming entirely. He said hospitals drained his spirit, that he needed time for himself to recharge so he could better support me. What that meant was weekends away at yoga retreats in Portland, alone, or so I thought. The most brutal night was when I decided to shave my head. Chemo was already thinning it into messy clumps. I wanted control over at least one thing, so I went to a salon. Daniel promised he'd be there, but at the last minute, he texted, "Sorry babe, too exhausted, you'll be fine." So I sat in that chair by myself. The clippers buzzed. My reflection blurred behind tears. The stylist cried with me, whispering, "You're so brave." But I didn't feel brave. I felt abandoned. I came home that night wearing my grandmother's silk scarf around my bare head. Daniel barely looked up from his laptop. "You don't have to try so hard to look strong," he muttered. That was the moment I felt something inside me fracture. I wasn't just sick. I was furious. After discovering Sophia's name on the transfers, I didn't confront Daniel immediately. No, that would have been too easy for him. He'd lie, twist things, gaslight me, until I started doubting myself. He was good at that. Instead, I played weak, helpless, the perfect, fragile cancer patient. I wanted him to underestimate me. Every night, Daniel left his laptop open just long enough for me to catch a glimpse. He was careless, almost cocky, like he never thought I'd have the strength to snoop. But chemo doesn't kill your brain. If anything, it sharpens your survival instincts. The first piece of evidence I found was an email. I waited until he stepped into the shower, then slid into his chair. My fingers shook as I opened his inbox. There it was. Subject line, "This weekend." The body of the email burned into me. "Can't wait to hold you again, Soph. She's so drained from treatment, she doesn't even notice when I'm gone. You make me feel alive. You remind me what love is supposed to feel like. Bought you that necklace you wanted, check your account." My stomach turned. The necklace. Paid with our savings. The money I thought was set aside for surgeries, medications, maybe even a trip we once dreamed of taking when I got better. But now, it was funding her jewelry box. I copied the email, forwarded it to myself, and deleted the trace. That was just the start. Over the next few weeks, I gathered more. Receipts hidden in his jacket pocket, hotel stays in Portland under business trips, credit card charges at restaurants I was too sick to visit, even Uber rides to Sophia's apartment. And then came the video. One night, after a particularly brutal chemo session, Daniel claimed he had to work late. I knew better. I installed a small nanny cam in our living room, disguised as a digital clock before he left. The footage I captured that night, Daniel walking in with Sophia, on my couch, laughing, drinking wine, her hands all over him. I watched from my hospital bed, weak but shaking with rage, as they kissed in the very place I once rested after my treatments. That was the night my revenge began to take form. Because suddenly, my cancer wasn't my enemy anymore. They were. People often think betrayal makes you lash out right away, screaming, crying, throwing things. But in my case, betrayal gave me something else. Clarity. The day I watched that nanny cam footage of Daniel and Sophia laughing on my couch, something inside me snapped. Not in a chaotic way, but in a cold, surgical way. It was as if my illness, the chemo, the bone-deep exhaustion, all of it burned away for one pure moment. I had never seen things clearer. Daniel thought my sickness made me weak. He thought I was too fragile, too dependent, too desperate to notice his double life. That was his biggest mistake. So, I put on a mask. At home, I played the part of the naive, grateful wife. I smiled weakly when he came home. I thanked him for working so hard for us. I let him hold my hand when visitors came by, let him paint the picture of the devoted husband. But inside, I was cataloging everything. Every receipt, every lie, every shift in his tone when he mentioned Sophia's name. And, oh, he slipped often. One evening, while making tea, I asked casually, "So, how was the client dinner?" He hesitated just a second too long. "Oh, it was fine. Just talked about numbers, boring stuff." Except his tie was loosened, his shirt wrinkled, and there was a faint trace of perfume I didn't own. I recognized it from the video Sophia's. I smiled, nodded, and let him believe I swallowed it whole. The hardest part wasn't acting, it was controlling the rage. The nights I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying his words in that email, "She's so drained she doesn't even notice." I noticed everything, but I couldn't show my hand yet, not until I had enough to destroy him completely. One afternoon, my sister Elena came to visit. She brought soup, kissed my forehead, and asked if I was holding up okay. I wanted to tell her everything to spill the entire disgusting truth. But I held it in, not because I didn't trust her, but because secrets like these are weapons. Once shared, they lose their edge. So instead, I said softly, "I'm okay." Daniel's been supportive. It felt like acid on my tongue. But Elena smiled, relieved, and told me she was proud of him for stepping up. If only she knew. Meanwhile, I started laying groundwork. I created a hidden folder on my phone labeled Medical Notes. Inside, I stored everything. Screenshots of his bank transfers to Sophia, the forwarded emails, photos of receipts, the nanny cam footage, carefully backed up to a cloud drive he didn't know existed. Every piece was a nail in his coffin. And yet, there were moments I almost broke. One night, I woke to hear him whispering on the phone in the bathroom. His voice was low, tender, a tone he hadn't used with me in months. "I miss you, baby. Just a little longer, okay? She's so out of it lately. Won't even notice if I slip away for a few days. We'll be together soon." I clenched my fists under the blanket until my nails dug crescents into my palms. A part of me wanted to fling open that bathroom door, rip the phone from his hands, and scream the truth in his face. But another part, the colder, sharper part, whispered, "Wait. Let him think he's winning." And so I did. The mask grew heavier by the day, playing dumb while he spun lies, letting him kiss my forehead before leaving for work, acting as though I didn't feel Sophia's shadow in every corner of our home. But here's the thing about masks. Wear them long enough, and people believe them. Daniel never suspected. In fact, he became bolder. He started leaving for business trips twice a month, sometimes 3. He came home smelling of perfume, his shirt buttons misaligned, his phone glued to him at all times. I pretended not to care. I pretended I was too tired, too broken, too distracted by chemo side effects to notice. Inside, I was smiling, because every slip, every lie, every absence gave me more ammunition. The breaking point came one night when I woke from a fevered sleep to find the house empty. Daniel was on call at work, he'd said, but hours passed, and he didn't return. At 2:30 a.m., I checked the nanny cam, and there he was, in our living room, with Sophia again, laughing, drinking, touching. The same scene replayed like some cruel loop, only this time, something was different. Sophia spotted the camera. She laughed, pointed at it, and Daniel smirked. Don't worry, she's too sick to even figure this out. They both laughed. That laugh lit a fire in me hotter than chemo ever could. At that moment, I knew I wasn't just going to expose him, I was going to ruin him. But how do you destroy someone who wears the mask of a perfect husband, a devoted partner to a dying wife? You wait, you sharpen your blade, and you make sure when it falls, it cuts so deep there's no coming back. And so, with the mask still firmly in place, I began designing the revenge that would make Daniel regret ever underestimating me. The trick with revenge is patience. Not the petty kind that flashes and fades. The kind that waits in the dark and knows exactly when to strike. After that night, after the laughter caught on camera and Sophia pointed right at my hidden lens, something shifted. It wasn't a sudden, cinematic moment of revelation. It was quieter. A tiny, merciless click, like a lock sliding into place. I had the proof. I had the motive. And I had one clear objective. Make sure every lie, every stolen dollar, every midnight caress, and every cruel message would be visible to everyone who mattered to the world that had once smiled politely at my illness and tut-tutted when I broke down. But you don't win by shouting. You win by being smarter than the people who thought they were smarter than you. First, logistics. I was still fragile. Chemo makes you small in ways people don't notice until you try to run a plan. My energy was rationed, my days mapped by blood counts and nausea windows, so I organized my strikes around my good hours. The lawyer I'd found was discreet and sharp. I could see his eyes flicker when I handed him the first slab of evidence. He didn't say much. That was the kind of man I wanted on my side. Quiet, methodical, dangerous when needed. I turned my home into a slow, careful forensic archive. There was a folder on my laptop I labeled personal important. He thought it was full of pill reminders and appointment letters. Inside, it was a vault, copies of bank transfers. Photos of receipts from the lakeside apartment, screenshots of chats where they joked about wrapping things up, the nanny cam footage cataloged, time-stamped, backed up in 3 locations. I even printed a copy and slid it into a sealed envelope because paper matters in court, paper can't be edited with a finger swipe. But evidence alone is not spectacle. Evidence is cold. You want people to see, to feel, to react. So I laid bait. I started small. A text left where he could see it. A whispered question to a neighbor about the new roommate. A vague comment on the phone like, I'm thinking about selling the lake house, it's been too much lately. When he asked why I'd say nothing, treating me with the patronizing air he perfected, I would sigh and pretend to be too tired to answer. I let him think his plan was invisible. Meanwhile, I needed to make sure there were no holes in the case. I met with the bank at dawn on a Thursday when the lobby was empty and I still felt brave. The fraud officer listened, frowned, and took notes. She asked the right questions, the kind that made you feel like maybe the system could be fixed. I filed a formal inquiry about the transfers and requested that any accounts linked to Sophia Reynolds be frozen pending investigation. I asked for transaction trails for paper trails that would unmask shell accounts and consulting fees. 2 important things happened that week. First, the bank investigator called me 2 days later. She'd traced one of the transfers back to a corporate account with a name I'd never heard but could feel the weight of. Riverton Wellness, LLC. When I Googled it, the website was minimal, glossy, a perfect cover. But the registry records the real records. The bank had showed the owner was a shell company tied to an attorney's trust in the same city where Daniel's father had his legal practice. I felt my chest hollow out. It wasn't just a lover. The money was moving through familiar hands. Second, I found a receipt Daniel had left in his jacket pocket, an old-fashioned paper receipt for a high-end wine and a bouquet. The jacket he'd left in the hall closet last week. I had it photographed, time-stamped. Under the receipt was a smear of perfume, the same scent that clung to Sophia on camera. That smell used to make my stomach drop. Now it was another nail. Those 2 discoveries were the spine of what I was building. They connected the emotional betrayal to a financial betrayal, to a legal structure. I wasn't chasing drama. I was building chain links. But you can't make a villain fall if he suspects the trap. So I had to feed him false signals. I let Daniel find a printed journal I'd left on the coffee table, a fake one full of half-truths and staged vulnerability where I'd written about slipping away, about being too tired. He ate it up. He told himself the story he wanted, and in doing so, made more mistakes. People who believe they've already won loosen their grip. They get sloppy. Then came the public element. Private revenge is a closed loop. It feeds only you. Public revenge turns things into oxygen. People need to witness that injustice and respond. That morning, when I felt well enough, I contacted a local reporter, a woman who had a reputation for taking cases that mattered. I sent her a small package, a burned USB with a single file labeled client. Inside was a carefully edited 90-second clip. Daniel and Sophia on my couch. The perfume, the laughter, the line where Sophia says she won't notice until it's too late. I didn't expect immediate fireworks. What I wanted was to make the reporter curious. Not outraged curiosity brings follow-ups. Outrage brings lawsuits. She wrote back within an hour asking to meet. That meeting was a risk. Journalists love a story but hate being fed traps, so I gave her a sliver enough to make her eyes widen, but not enough to parade me in tabloids. I let her ask the right questions. I watched her pen move. She told me she could run it quietly and see where it went. She promised discretion. And when she left, she tapped the envelope near her bag like a player holding a joker. Inside, my lawyer had drafted a civil complaint ready to file the moment the bank froze assets. The DA I'd been quietly speaking with had said the fraud unit was already circling. Everything had to line up. The press, the bank, the police, like dominoes, like a stage where the lights would all flare at once. But even the best laid plan has a human variable. You can't plan for courage or cowardice. You can only measure reactions. The moment that tested everything, the moment that made me hold my breath for days, happened because of one simple petty thing Daniel couldn't help: arrogance. He bought an engagement ring for Sophia. Not a subtle ring. A ring with a price that could be traced, a boutique that used credit cards and receipts, and a name that could be subpoenaed. He wrapped it in tissue paper and left it on the kitchen island like an offering. The arrogance of that gesture stunned me. He thought he'd replace me entirely and could celebrate the replacement openly. That ring turned the private wound into public ammunition because it created a trail someone in authority could follow. I sat up that night, my hands trembling, but my mind clear as glass. The trap was set, the pieces placed. All I needed now was a match. And then, as if on cue, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "We know what you did. Be careful." The screen blurred. My heart pounded like a drum. Had someone found out about my cameras? Had Daniel's circle turned the tables? Or was this the first real ripple of my plan, working, people watching, people frightened, people starting to move? I looked at the clock. It was 2:11 a.m. The night outside was a low, indifferent black. I pressed my thumb to the phone and opened the message again. The sender was gone. The match was lit somewhere. The air smelled like smoke. And for the first time since the laughter on my couch, I did not feel afraid. I felt exactly where I wanted to be, poised. I whispered into the dark, to myself, more than anyone. Now, I hit send on an email to the reporter with one more file attached, the bank trace that linked the shell company to the family lawyer. I watched the progress bar crawl, then stall. My hands went cold. The bar blinked, uploading 99%, and then the lights in my house went out. I sat in the pitch, clutching the laptop, and waited for what came next. The lights going out felt like the world pausing to listen. For a second, I sat there with the laptop open, the upload at 99%, heart hammering so loud I could have sworn the neighbors heard it. Then the entire house surrendered to darkness. No traffic hum, no fridge whine, only the cold sound of my own breath. I could have panicked. People do when the stakes are high and everything goes quiet, but panic would have been the luxury of the unprepared. Instead, I leaned forward, thumb on the trackpad, and whispered one instruction to the laptop as if it could move on. Sympathy alone. Finish. When the power returned 3 minutes later, a trickle, a blink, then steady, the upload completed. Sent. The file went to the reporter, the DA, and my lawyer simultaneously. It felt almost obscene how simple it was. A click, a chain reaction, a legal notice in motion. The bank email pinged within the hour. Short, bureaucratic, but with teeth. Preliminary freeze initiated. Please provide notarized ID and signed affidavit within 48 hours. My hand shook as I photographed the message and sent it to my lawyer. He replied with a single line, "Good. Keep your phone close. Don't leave town." And I didn't. I stayed put, sitting under a blanket in the half-dark, replaying the footage in my head. It had been raw, ugly, and precise laughter. Wine poured. The cocky little joke about closing things out. It was enough to give a prosecutor a reason to look. But conviction doesn't happen from a single clip. You need layers. Motive, method, opportunity, and the human voices that tie them together. The reporter called at noon. Her voice was crisp and a little shaky. She said the clip had been run past a friend at the paper and they wanted more. Not published yet, not until the DA had a chance to act, but they were ready to write a careful piece about suspected financial misconduct. When she asked if I'd speak on record, I said no. My lawyer later told me that was wise. Silence is a blade in a world that loves noise. That afternoon, a man from the financial fraud unit arrived at my sister's house where I'd been staying between chemo. He introduced himself quietly, with the trained softness of someone who needed to be trusted. He asked questions with the care of a surgeon, dates of transfers, phone numbers, account names. I handed him the sealed envelope of my printed evidence. He did not smile when he read the chat transcripts. He only folded his hands, a small, measured acknowledgement that this was bigger than a bad marriage. "We'll move carefully," he said. "We don't want to alert people who might destroy evidence." The phrase lodged in my throat like a warning. Don't alert them. That meant I had to keep playing the woman I'd become in their minds, the one who was still too weak to fight, the one they had already buried in their imagination. Over the next 2 days, I watched reactions like a hawk. Daniel stopped sleeping at night. I could hear him on the other end of a phone call, from the footage pacing, pleading, using names of colleagues. He called his mother twice in one evening, voice tight. The son of a well-connected legal family, he started to look around as if people could see the stain on him now and were pointing. He began to spend money less ostentatiously, like someone trying to hide footprints in the sand. Then came the first outward hit. The bank froze the joint account. I watched the scene unfold on a live court notification from my lawyer's inbox. A temporary injunction requested, a freeze placed on all accounts linked to Riverton Wellness and Sophia Reynolds. The reporter texted, timed carefully, "Don't go on social." I obeyed. There was a strange, almost morbid relief in watching the world I'd been denied begin to fold into the one I wanted for myself. But the plan demanded patience and, cruelly, the right moment for the public to see the fall. So I kept my act on. I smiled when they kissed my forehead. I coughed on cue. I let Sophia reorganize my medicine, all while my camera trained on her hands. It's amazing what people reveal when they believe they've already won. Sophia's confidence swelled. She became careless. She left her phone unlocked on the counter again. She began to call Daniel baby in chats the way a conspirator might name a co-conspirator. These were not grand speeches, just tiny admissions that built a case like slow masonry. Then came a twist I hadn't planned for. The DA's office emailed, "We're stepping in. We need testimony from someone who can corroborate bank-to-bank transfers through legal trails." They wanted the paper trail through the attorney who set up Riverton Wellness. For a heartbeat, I felt disoriented. That name? Arthur C., the same lawyer my father-in-law had recommended years ago? Had I exposed something that would reach down even further than I knew? This was the moment a plan either doubles down or shatters. If the DA asked for that trail, it meant law enforcement could subpoena documents from powerful offices. It also meant the risk of a leak, of a smear campaign. Power fights back. Power retaliates. I called my lawyer, and we strategized in low tones. He told me to expect a call from Daniel any minute now. He was right. The phone buzzed. He texted, "Please, let's fix this. I love you." The best liars always pick love as their defense because it's messy and easy to humanize. I took my time answering. I typed a single sentence and sent it. "If you truly loved me, you would have stayed." He replied with a flood of apologies and a plea to meet. I didn't? Not yet. I let the silence be my instrument. But the twist, the thing that made my stomach drop into the dark, was something else entirely. The financial fraud unit called that night and told me they'd traced a transfer from Riverton Wellness to a trust account in the name of a retired judge, a public figure with a reputation for integrity. The implication was enormous. Someone had been laundering payments across layers of institutional respectability. If that name went public, the fallout would not be limited to a broken marriage. It would topple reputations and force the judiciary to look inward. As I sat in my sister's kitchen, fingers wrapped around a mug that had gone cold, my lawyer's email came through. Attached, a scanned page from a registry showing Riverton Wellness had been registered at an address only 2 blocks from the law firm that had handled my mother's estate. The same firm, the same names. The world collapsed into a cold, clear line. Everything was connected. For the first time, I realized this was not only Daniel's crime, it was an institutional web that included people who had the power to bury stories for decades. It would make the battle larger and riskier, but it also meant the reward would be bigger, exposure, justice for more than just me. Picture this, it's 10 o'clock. My hands are steady now, but my throat is tight. There is a knock at the door. The knock is polite but insistent. No one comes to this house at night unless there's a reason. I tell my sister to stay in the kitchen. I stand, and as I move toward the door, my phone buzzes with a message from the reporter. We have corroboration. Meet me now. I open the door anyway. Outside, under the sodium-lit street lamp, stands a woman I have never seen before. She is older, wrapped in a thick coat, and she holds an envelope in her hand. Her eyes are tired but deliberate. She looks at me as if measuring how much I already know. She lifts the envelope and says 3 words that make me forget to breathe. I worked with Helen. My pulse stops. Helen, the name the reporter had whispered over coffee last week, the consultant who advised the clinic in another city. Helen was the missing link I never expected. I step back. The night folds into the space between us, and the woman adds, softer, "You're not the only one she took from." The door swings shut behind me. The envelope sits on my kitchen table unopened. Inside, documents, a confession, or bones of another conspiracy. My hands hover over the flap. The phone rings. It's the DA's office with an urgent request. We need to serve a subpoena at dawn. Be ready. I close my eyes and whisper, not to the DA, not to the reporter, but to myself. One step at a time, one truth at a time. Then I open the envelope. They always called me gentle. Patient. Too patient. They were wrong. By the time Chapter 7 begins, I had stopped letting fury run me like a fever. I learned to make it cold, to temper it with paperwork, timestamps, and premeditation. This chapter is where the war stops being a scream and becomes a strategy, and where I begin to move pieces they don't even know are on the board. I knew 2 things for certain. They were organized, and they were greedy. They'd left fingerprints not just on my things, but on the pattern of their behavior. That pattern, once visible, can be dissected. Once dissected, it becomes evidence. Evidence is what turns gossip into prosecution. Evidence is what turns pain into power. So I opened a new document on my laptop and named it deliberately Chessboard. It was an ugly practical title, but I liked it. It felt accurate. The first move was almost boring. I sat for hours, mapping transactions, using the bank app, printing statements, comparing dates. I watched transfers that matched breathwork retreats, floral cards, spa bills, all of them paid through the joint account. Each receipt I printed felt like a small knife sliding into the map of the lie. A recurring transfer every month, the same amount, labeled wellness deposit. It didn't match any invoices the so-called consultant gave. She only had cash receipts or handwritten notes. The bank automatically generated a digital trail. That hidden trail told me she wasn't freelance. She had a shadow account at a boutique property management firm. I wrote it down. Underline. Circle. Repeat. I was deliberate. Subpoenas come from legal requests, not reckless posts. So I looped my lawyer in and asked for professional subpoenas for one account only, the property management firm tied to that recurring transfer. If I was right, it would match the lease I'd found in Daniel's folder. If I was wrong, I'd be exposed. I didn't care. Truth is a risk I was ready to take. I could have installed cameras and left it at that, but the best evidence blends recording with human context. Videos are cold. People lose empathy for clips. So I added witness colleagues, friendly neighbors, someone who would later testify about patterns of behavior, sleepless nights, deliveries at odd hours. The mistress seen carrying shopping bags from my favorite store. I called Rosa, a neighbor who owned a corner bodega and never liked dishonesty, and told her, in vague terms, I needed to know who'd been coming and going at odd hours. I didn't tell her everything. I gave her a reason that fit her sensibilities. Keep an eye out for the man with the gray cap. She agreed, because she always agreed when something smelled rotten. Within a week, Rosa texted a photo of Sophia leaving with a bouquet that matched the florist's name on one of the receipts. She didn't know it mattered. I did. Cloaked corroboration. A photograph from an unpaid witness with nothing to gain but the truth. Stack it next to the bank transfer printouts. It's starting to look like a pattern, not a coincidence. I needed Daniel to expose himself without suspecting I knew everything. People reveal their worst when they think they're clever. My plan was to make them feel clever. So I started small. I let petty things slide. I laundered evidence into normal life and fed them tiny, safe provocations. The goal wasn't to humiliate in the moment. It was to let arrogance build. Arrogance makes people sloppy. I asked Sophia calmly, sweetly, for advice about a pillow for my neck and a recommended therapist resource. I did it while Daniel was in the room. I watched her puff up like a peacock. She gave me a pamphlet with a clinic logo. It looked real but had no address. Later, under a pretense, I asked Daniel for the invoice for the retreat. He shrugged. It's under future projects. He left his laptop open on the couch. An accountant's dream. A cached email on his computer. Daniel had been forward-sending confirmations to a separate email account, the same one that received several of the wellness transfer confirmations. The email chain had dates, times, and the thing I'd been waiting for, a scanned copy of a lease signature. An initial that matched the receipt on my kitchen counter. That initial was the same slant as the signature on the joint account authorization. It was not just a signature, it was a signature of intent. I'm not a monster. I kept journals. I carried photos of the day my mother hugged me when she said, "You don't owe anyone your life." When the nights were darkest, I read her handwriting. That's the fuel that kept me precise. I would not trade my mother's voice for rage. I would trade lies for evidence. There were moments when my body betrayed me. Chemo, fog, dizziness, exhaustion. During one long afternoon of strategizing at the kitchen table, my vision blurred and I had to lie down. For some twisted second, I thought about walking away. It's terrifying to realize the enemy is your bed partner, and terrifyinger still to admit you'd have to outplay someone who knows you better than most people do. But the clarity returned. I felt more dangerous because of the fragility. The stakes were not just money, they were the right to be alive, to be believed. Just as I thought the plan was a slow, unspooling triumph, a new file appeared. Daniel had been careless, predictable, but not stupid. He had one last thing he was hiding. A notarized document intended to be signed the day after he filed for early liquidation. It had a clause to reassign my mother's inheritance management to him, for medical expediency. I hadn't seen the document before. It was fresh. It came attached to an email that had a single line at the top. Procedure is urgent. I'd asked the bank for real-time alerts 2 weeks before. They were watching the joint account like hawks. When the email appeared, the bank flagged a suspicious wire attempt. I nearly jumped out of my chair. The notarized file had a witness signature that wasn't Daniel's handwriting at all. It was a forged witness signature, a professional forgery with a tiny, telltale looping flourish that matched an old will revision done by the same estate attorney who'd handled my mother's will years ago. That meant someone in the legal circle, an insider, had been complicit. The scheme was bigger than a husband and a mistress. It ran into people I had trusted by reputation. For a second I froze. This elevated things. The chessboard had more players. That night I called my lawyer and read the notarized line aloud. My voice, steady, controlled. He told me to sit tight until the DA's unit could get the full subpoena. He said the case had become career-ending and criminal. He said words like network and mobility and forgery ring in the same breath. Then my phone vibrated. Unknown number, a recorded voice. You have 2 days. Drop it, or the person you love will stop getting treatments. At the end of the message, a click. The line was dead. I felt an old animal, part of me wake up primal and angry, but there was also the lawyer's voice, rational and bright in my ear. We've already got enough for a freezing order. Don't react. He was right. Reaction without control is what they wanted. So I did the unromantic but necessary thing. I emailed encrypted copies of everything to 2 journalists I trusted and to my lawyer. I told the DA, subpoena the estate attorney, tap the suspicious property management firm, get a trace on the shell accounts. I set everything in motion, and then I sat down and breathed. The chapter ends with the lights going out in my apartment, not because I failed, but because the doorbell rings, and downstairs I hear 2 quiet knocks that sound impossibly familiar. A taxi, a suitcase, the hall carpet brushing, and in the dark with my headphones on and the camera feed live, I tell the viewer whispering into the mic because this is where the stakes snap taut. If they think my silence will save them, they've never seen me fight when I have nothing left to lose. When people talk about justice, they imagine it arriving like thunder, loud, dramatic, final. The truth? Justice often arrives in manila envelopes. That morning, I woke to a knock on my own door. Not a threat this time. A uniformed officer, polite but firm, handed me a copy of the subpoena list. The DA had officially entered my case into the system. The names on that sheet felt like an X-ray of betrayal. Daniel, Sophia, the boutique property firm, and the one that froze my stomach, the estate attorney who had handled my mother's will. The storm had started. And they had no idea how many leaks their ship already had. Within 48 hours, the bank froze Daniel's access to joint accounts. He tried to log in from his laptop, I know, because I received the security alert. Denied. Another attempt, denied again. That night, Rosa texted me she'd seen Daniel on the corner outside her bodega pacing on the phone. She overheard him snapping at someone, "I don't care what the lawyer said, move it before they trace it." That phrase, "move it before they trace it," was more than panic. It was an admission. And I logged it immediately, sending the timestamp and location to my lawyer. Another brick in the wall. You learn a lot about people when the walls close in. Daniel strutted like a man with nothing to fear. But Sophia? She cracked fast. The DA's investigator pulled her phone records. There were dozens of late-night calls, not just to Daniel, but to a number registered under the property management firm. Even worse, a recorded voicemail where Sophia begged, "Please don't put my name on it. I just did what he told me." That voicemail, legally obtained, meant the wellness consultant image she painted of herself was now evidence of her guilt. And yet, it also suggested something else. She wasn't the mastermind. She was a pawn who'd believed she was a queen. If arrogance is a poison, Daniel drank it daily. Even after the subpoenas, he thought he could bluff his way through. He emailed the estate attorney with one line: "We had a deal. Don't let her find the 2019 files." The DA intercepted the email as part of the subpoena. That single sentence exposed two things: a secret file buried from me and collusion with my mother's attorney going back years. When my lawyer read it to me over the phone, my knees buckled. The 2019 files, I had no idea what they were yet, but the implication was clear. Daniel's betrayal didn't start with my illness. It had roots going back further, maybe even before my mother passed. I thought I was fighting a 2-year deception. Now I realize it might have been 5, maybe longer. I won't lie to you, this was the night I broke. Sitting alone in my apartment, papers strewn across the floor like confetti of betrayal, I whispered out loud, "Did you ever love me at all?" My hands shook as I pressed record on my phone, leaving a raw voice memo for myself. I wanted to remember the exact pitch of my heartbreak, because heartbreak was fuel. My anger wasn't enough, my sorrow had to sharpen into strategy. That's when I made myself a promise. If this was a chessboard, I wasn't playing defense anymore. I was going for checkmate. The DA called the next morning. "We've got enough for a preliminary hearing. 10 days. 10 days. 10 days until the lies that had lived in the shadows for years would be dragged into the fluorescent light of a courtroom. 10 days until Daniel, Sophia, and the crooked attorney would have to look at the evidence stacked against them. But here's the thing about liars cornered in court: they don't go down quietly. They scramble, they scheme, they threaten. And I knew Daniel too well. He wasn't going to let the truth come out without trying one last desperate move. 3 nights before the court date, I came home to find my apartment door slightly ajar. I froze. Inside, nothing looked stolen, but my laptop was gone. The one with the chessboard file? I stood there in the silence, my pulse hammering in my ears, and realized the enemy wasn't waiting for court. They were already inside my walls. And that's where Chapter 8 ends, with me staring into the dark apartment, knowing the war had shifted again, and whispering into the mic. If they wanted me scared, they should have remembered I've already beaten death once. You can't intimidate someone who's not afraid to lose everything. The morning of the hearing, Manhattan felt different. The air was sharp, metallic, like the city itself knew something ugly was about to be dragged into the light. I arrived at the courthouse in a plain black suit. No wig, no makeup, no attempt to soften my presence. I wanted Daniel to see what he'd made me, not the soft woman who once trusted him, but the survivor forged in betrayal. When he walked in, he smirked. That same smug grin he'd worn the day I found Sophia on my couch. Except now, he wasn't flanked by confidence. He was flanked by 2 lawyers, eyes darting like cornered rats. Sophia trailed behind, pale, shaking. And then I saw him, the estate attorney, the one my mother trusted, now standing shoulder to shoulder with the man who had gutted me. My stomach twisted, but my resolve hardened. The DA opened with something simple, undeniable: the transfers. Thousands siphoned from my joint account into Sophia's consultancy. Transaction histories showing Daniel had funneled not just our money, but even portions of my disability checks into Sophia's company. Watching the courtroom shift as that fact landed was delicious, the jurors' eyebrows raising, the collective gasp. I glanced at Daniel. His smirk was gone. Then came Sophia. She had been subpoenaed, and under oath, the mask slipped. She admitted, voice trembling, that Daniel had promised her financial security, that he told her my illness was dragging him down, and that once I was gone, they'd start a new life with the money. She broke down when the DA played the voicemail of her saying, "Please don't put my name on it, I just did what he told me." The jury saw it. The judge saw it. She wasn't a mastermind, she was a cowardly accomplice. And Daniel? He looked at her with pure contempt, like a man watching his pawn collapse. Then came the moment I had been waiting for. The DA dropped the email. We had a deal. Don't let her find the 2019 files. The judge demanded the files be produced, and when they were, the courtroom erupted. Those files showed that back in 2019, right after my mother's death, Daniel had conspired with the attorney to suppress an addendum to her will. That document, it left me full ownership of the apartment we lived in. Daniel had no legal claim, none. For years he had lived in my home, stealing my inheritance, while letting me believe we were equals. The betrayal wasn't 2 years old. It stretched back to the very roots of my grief. And then, the coup de grace. I handed the DA the flash drive, the nanny cam footage, Daniel and Sophia kissing on my couch while I lay in a hospital bed fighting for my life. The courtroom was silent as it played. Silent except for Daniel's breathing heavy, panicked. Silent except for my heartbeat, pounding with vindication. When it ended, I looked directly at him for the first time in months, and I whispered, just loud enough for him to hear, "Checkmate." The judge ruled swiftly. Daniel was charged with fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. The attorney faced disbarment and charges of his own. Sophia struck a deal probation in exchange for full cooperation. And me? I was granted full legal ownership of my apartment, restitution for the stolen funds, and the DA's office pledged to pursue every cent Daniel had hidden. But the real victory wasn't on paper. It was in Daniel's face as he was led out in handcuffs, the mask finally gone, replaced with fear. Walking out of the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Flashes popped. Microphones shoved toward me. "Isabella, do you feel justice was served?" one asked. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply said, "Justice isn't about punishment. It's about reminding people like him that survivors don't stay silent. We fight, and we win." That night, I poured myself a glass of wine, alone, in my apartment that was finally, truly mine. I sat on the couch where Daniel once betrayed me and whispered into the silence, "You took my trust. You tried to take my life. But in the end, I took everything back." And that's what revenge feels like. And yet, sometimes late at night, I wonder, were the 2019 files the whole story? Or are there other secrets buried deeper, waiting to surface? But one thing I know for certain, if they ever try to crawl back into my life, I'll be ready. Because I've already proven no one poisons me twice.
Thank you for being here. If you enjoyed this, go watch the one of the left and don't forget to hit like and subscribe to the channel for more tales of triumph over injustice and a saga of ultimate revenge.